Hey everyone, how's it going? Well, it happened. We hit the 5,000 subscriber mark, and as promised, I've released an update to the Eevee shader free for you to download. And so I'm just putting together this video really quickly. Apologize for it being a little bit too late. Didn't expect the numbers to climb so high and then surpass it. So I'm going to take you through in this quick demo the settings, some lighting setup, and as a special bonus in the file included is a setup to separate out your freestyle lines from your colors so that you can do some more interesting composites and stuff like that right there in the Eevee shader. So what's changed? What's new? How is this different? Well, let's go take a look at the old one, okay? And you'll notice that the node setup had some different types of controls, okay? This one had something called shadow banding, which meant that you got to choose the levels of banding that the shader would give. And so if we typed in 3, we get 1, 2, 3 bands or 4 sets of colors. You could still, grow and shrink those a little bit. You can soften the shadows right up or have them really, really hard. And then I had a monocolor and a duotone setup where you could mix between the two, all right? Also, there was no real rim lighting because it was a shader that could interact with the lighting setup that you produce. And so if you wanted a rim light, you just set up another light and bang, you got it. Now, in this new version, I've approached it in a bit of a different way. Now, the setup right now has got no lighting whatsoever. And what I've included in this are some settings which is going to give you some seriously cool control over your toon shading. So let's take these settings one by one. Obviously, the first thing we've got here is the color. You can adjust the color to be whatever you wish. And even if you wanted to plug in a texture or a custom matte, whatever, you can plug it straight into that color and it would map on to the object, no problem. We've got this color saturation control, which means that you can have completely desaturated color, which just goes straight to white, or 100% saturated, which is 100% of that color. Then we've got this shadow intensity, but I can't show you this shadow intensity until we put a light in the scene. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'm just going to go into top view here, Shift A, and I'm just going to add an ordinary point light. Now we are in the Eevee shader, okay? So just keep in mind that we're using the Eevee settings. The lights operate a slightly different to cycles, okay? Here are our lighting settings, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to move this light around. For effect, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn down these rim light settings completely, and I'll get to those in a second so that you can see how the shadow is cast. And we can see that we get this lovely two-tone shadow where we've got dark on one side, light on the other. And the shadow intensity basically can switch between full black and no shadow at all. So the shadow size, dependent on the light, will switch on. Okay, you can switch it completely off, so we've just got full color, or we can start to get a bit of an increase and creep that shadow size over the face of the normal within reason. And if you don't want it at all, you could just move that lamp away. Okay, so we can have the lamp quite far away and the shadow interacts with it there. We've got a soft lighting setting, which means it softens the light, but I've put an extra feature here in which we can actually brighten up the shadow a little bit as well. And so that just sort of makes the lighting a little bit more intense, okay? And it's got its uses, okay? But let's just drop that soft light right down. Now I've added this feature called rim light, and basically the way it operates is we can select a color. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to grab this color swatch and bring it down to the rim color so it's the same color as the body, and I'll show you why. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bump up the rim intensity to 1, and then we're going to play around with the width. And so as we increase the width, you'll see that a rim light appears, okay? And it basically sits on the outside opposite edge to the light. You can see here that we don't really see the actual faces lit over here. We just see the sort of the undercarriage over here. And we can increase the width, and it gives us this sort of rim right around the object, which is really nice. And we can lower that intensity so that we can fake, if we wanted to, this kind of, bounce lighting or rim lighting, as it were. So we've got this sort of softer tone that is, lower in value than this sort of key light tone. And you can basically control that for a full tune effect. All right, so now we can start to tinker with a few things. For instance, we can add in this soft lighting if we want and not make it fully intense. And what that does is it puts in a bit of a gradient on the key light side. And we can sort of brighten that up a little bit if we wanted to, so that we can get some really subtle tune shading effects just with a single point light. Now you'll notice that I've added this extra feature called light factor. These lights have colors. This one's purple, this one's yellow, okay? And they're both affecting the surface. It's almost like it's knocked out that rim light altogether because we now have one. So we may as well drop that rim light down completely and just have the lamps if we wanted to, right? Just showing up like that, okay? So now with the light factor, what this does is it allows you to incrementally introduce a little bit of the lighting from the colors from that lighting. So if we sort of bump this soft light right down, took away the brightness completely, maybe made that shadow intensity, really stark. Now what we've got is some lighting which we can even increase maybe the intensity of this light. Maybe make this a little bit more orangey. Okay. And so you can actually have the light from the environment lighting and coloring your object if that's the way you prefer to color. Okay, and it's got its uses, and sort of having that blend there means that you can introduce just a little bit if you wanted to, and sort of have it just interact with the color settings itself. And so we can sort of see how this lamp is really affecting that area over there, for instance. But we still have a bit of that blue tone in here at a very low setting. Okay, and so this is a feature where for example, what I've got here in my jet bike is actually a couple of headlamps. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable these ones that I've prepared earlier. And they're just sort of set in front of the headlamp over here. Okay, to give the impression that if light was emitting from those headlamps in sort of like a spherical glow, it would have an impact on the actual surface. And you can sort of see here how it's impacting really, really nicely. And then you sort of, can soften up that lighting if you wanted to, brighten that up a little bit. And all of a sudden we've got this lighting scenario that is quite complicated, and it's giving us a really beautiful looking render. Now, speaking of rendering, I've set up a couple of passes here. So let's join this together. Let's go into our camera view, which will render a pass with freestyle as well as a pass with just the colors. And I've done a couple of things so that you can set up your scene any way you wish and then do a render. And so I'm going to do that right now. And so the combined render looks something like this. So what is going on? Well, if we took a look at just the freestyle pass, you can see how the freestyle lines have been indeed applied over everything. The colors are there and everything like that. And just the straight pass are just the colors as we kind of see in the viewport. Now, how do I separate out the ink pass? All I've done is a simple setup, which is slightly different from a setup that one of you showed me a little while ago. What I end up doing is I separate out the Y channel of the image to get this grayscale version. I have to set an alpha because the alpha actually isn't carried on it. And then I just give it a brightness contrast so that I get my blacks and whites. And now this gives me my ink pass, which I can then composite over the image. Now I've just added this glare just for a little bit of effect. okay? And I can increase or decrease the level of ink, as it were. And there we've got this wonderful toon shade that renders, in a pretty good amount of time, but you can basically change the intensity of that ink pass. And because the terminator, that black area over there, is still carried in the colors, okay, it's not going to mess about too much with that setting. But everywhere else, it's going to, be able to be faded out a little bit, and it gives you just that little extra control, just in case you wanted to separate out your freestyle passes. Now, of course, how would you go about applying this material? Well, if you've watched any of my other tutorials, you know how, but if this is the first time you've sort of seen anything and you just want this shader, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of how you apply the shader. So I have here just a quick setup over here with some objects. I've set the render setting to Eevee. All we do is we go File, Append, and we navigate to where I've got the Toon Shader. I go to Material, Toon Shader Eevee version 2, and then I simply apply it as a material. Okay, so I'm just going to go into Rendered View here, and it's currently very dark, because the light isn't close enough, okay? So that default lighting, okay, I'm just going to link all of the materials together, okay? And now you can see how that default lighting affects that object. Now, of course, we can duplicate that lighting a number of times. We can maybe have a sun lamp here, okay? And you can sort of see how that affects it. Now, I said a little while ago that the lighting in Eevee is slightly different. So what I highly recommend you do is go over to the docs.blender.org site and take a look at all of the lamp settings there, and really sort of get to know Eevee lamps through here. Like I said, they're slightly different to Cycles shading. So like if you've got a Cycles scene and you just switch over to Eevee, you're gonna just have to tweak a couple of things, and it makes good sense to know what those things are. So let's just take a look at the point light for a second. Okay, I'm gonna move it over here. Delete this point light here. Okay, put it in a nice area over there. Now, over here we've got the color. The power is in watts because it's basically a real world setting. And so if you wanted a 20 watt lamp, you can see that this is a very small scene, right? And so if we were to move this lamp further away, you would have to increase the wattage to get it brighter. So the closer you get it to the object, the more intense the light is, okay? And that's got nothing to do with the shader. Okay, but if you have a fairly small scene to light, you want to drop the power. Now, the radius is almost like ray shadow softening, increasing the radius. You're basically increasing, sort of like distributing the power over that radius, and so it becomes a softer lamp. And in this case, because we've got our settings, let's just bring up our shader settings here. We can see that we've got a bit of softness in the light. We can drop the shadow intensity a little bit just so we can see it a little bit better. But you can sort of see that if we had really soft lights, okay, and we increased that radius, you can see how it gets even softer. Okay, so 0 would be very harsh, intense, but then you can sort of get a softer light. And so if you want that extra control over the softness of the shadows, you can bump that soft light up, right up high, and you can get a softer gradient, as it were. All right, so then we've got a couple of other things, like, for instance, the shadow. The clip start, I always like to set really low, just in case you have your lighting really close. Everything like softness and everything, you can sort of keep these at its defaults, but this custom distance is interesting because it almost overrides the radius. Setting a custom distance is almost like the inverse of this. So you can see that the distance is actually the distance at which the 0 factor of the light begins. And so at a distance of 20, you can see how that's very, very intense. Whereas if we were to do 20 on this, you have a very faded light. So it's almost the inverse of setting this radius. And so if you want to, you can play around with that. Now, all the lamps have their own settings, of course, but they all work with this shader just fine. So this sun lamp gives us a nice directional light. We're just going to set that radius to 0 here. And if we wanted a spot lamp, again, we've got some other settings here. So we obviously have to possibly increase the custom radius on a spot lamp to really work well. But we definitely have to bump up the power of a spot lamp, right, to really get it working nicely. Okay, so this custom distance comes in really handy for spot lamps. The blending, can sort of like have this blending of the spot as well. It sort of almost works like how a spot lamp should work. The size of it, but you can almost see how the distance really clips off here. And then there's your area lamp. And the area lamp, again, works. We're going to have a square. Oh, actually, wow, we've got a disc setting here, for instance, and we want the size of the disc, right? Again, it works on that sort of inverse thing. So a 0 size on the disc gives us a nice bright lamp. Increasing the size of the disc distributes it for a softer lamp, but adding the custom size sort of makes an invert version of that. And so all those lighting scenarios will work with this lamp. So if you've got a complex scene with a lot of different lights, this material should interact to a fairly good degree. Now, I don't want to leave all the 2.79 users out in the dark, okay? Because you're not going to be able to use this Eevee shader in 2.79. So I'm also releasing this, which is a 3-tone shader. It's almost like a watered-down version of the manga shader, and it allows you full control over a base color, highlight, and rim color that you can mix together. There is no softening on this one, so this is just a nice harsh color palette, 3-tone, just for these areas of color, and you can choose the exact color you want, or even plug in a texture or material into these slots. You can have that base saturation set straight up high to black, so it creates a Terminator effect if you wish, or you can decrease the amount of area for each of these, okay, or even the intensity, and so they sort of mix over each other for various effects. It's a really simple shader to use, and it gives you that toon shade effect. And I've added both the 2.80 and the 2.79 versions of this particular shader, which again are going to have to go into wireframe mode. It works, with a single point lamp, a single sun lamp, that is, to change the direction, and the rim light basically works 180 degrees to that key light. Thanks for getting me to this level, guys. This means a lot to me. It means that what I'm doing is worthwhile to you. That's why you subscribe, obviously. And I just wanted to sort of give these little freebies away as a bit of a reward for getting me to this level. It really means a lot. And the links are down in the description of this video for you to download. Hope this comes in really handy. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye for now.